"I'll write you a check for $100,000 right now if you can solve this," the millionaire sneered, stabbing a finger at the screen. The executives chuckled, humoring him. But the moment a kid in battered sneakers slid into the chair, the laughter died in their throats. The boardroom on the 47th floor of Vertex Global had never witnessed a scene quite like this. Floor-to-ceiling glass turned the city skyline into expensive wallpaper, while the imported mahogany table mirrored the shocked faces of 11 executives staring at the impossible. But let's rewind. This story doesn't actually start in a high-rise. It begins miles away, in a cramped apartment where the smell of fresh coffee battled the rhythmic clacking of keys in the dark. Mateo Ríos hadn't caught a wink of sleep. His eyes were stinging as he stared at the ancient laptop, a piece of junk his grandma had fished out of a dumpster behind a tech firm. The thing wheezed, ran hot enough to fry an egg, and crashed whenever it felt like it. But to Mateo, it was a gateway to the entire universe. Doña Esperanza stood in the doorway of the tiny room they called home. Her hands were rough, calloused from decades of scrubbing other people's floors, but her eyes still held that quiet defiance of someone who refuses to give up hope. "Mijo, you've been up all night again." Her voice was gentle, lacking any real scolding tone. "What are you working on that's so important?" Mateo spun around, his beat-up sneakers dragging against the cold tile. He looked wrecked but wired. That specific manic energy you only see in people obsessed with their craft. "Abuela, I found it. A glitch nobody can fix. The biggest tech giants have been banging their heads against the wall on this for months." Esperanza leaned in, squinting at the screen. It was just a wall of scrolling symbols and numbers. Alien hieroglyphics as far as she was concerned. "And you think you can crack it?" "I already did," Mateo whispered. "Well, almost. I'm missing one piece, but I know the logic. I just need a computer that doesn't lag every 2 seconds." The old woman sighed heavily. She recognized that spark in his eyes. It was the same look her own son had, Mateo's father, before that construction site accident took him from them. It was the same fire his mother had before the grief hollowed her out and she decided she couldn't stay in this world anymore. Mateo had landed in her arms when he was barely out of diapers. Since that day, Esperanza had worked double shifts to provide for him. It never felt like enough, but every scrap she gave him was wrapped in unconditional love. "I have a shift today at that big corporate tower," Esperanza said, choosing her words carefully. "Vertex something. Vertex Global." Mateo shot up in his chair. "Abuela, that's them. They're the ones posting the bounty. They're offering $100,000 to anyone who can patch their security breach. $100,000. Esperanza pressed a hand to her chest. "That's life-changing money, Abuela. We could clear the debts. You could finally retire. I could go to a decent school, use hardware that wasn't built in the 90s. Esperanza looked at him. He was so young, so brilliant, yet completely invisible to a society that only cared about degrees and last names. "Mijo, those people, they don't listen to kids, especially not kids from our side of town. But if I could just show them the code, they'd drag you out by your collar before you even said hello." The silence that followed hung heavy in the room. Mateo looked down at his lap and Esperanza felt something fracture inside her chest. She'd spent her whole life as a ghost, mopping floors for people who looked right through her, taking out the trash for men who made her annual salary in a single afternoon. But her grandson was different. Mateo had a gift. She didn't understand the mechanics of it, but she knew it was special. And if the world wasn't going to give him a seat at the table, she'd have to kick the door down herself. "Get dressed," she said suddenly. "What?" "I said get dressed. You're coming with me." "But Abuela, you just said—" "I know what I said. But I also remember your grandfather, God rest his soul, always saying miracles don't just fall into your lap. You have to go out and grab them. So, today, we're grabbing yours." The Vertex Global Tower pierced the sky, a needle of steel and glass in the financial district. Mateo had never seen anything so massive in his life. From the sidewalk, the clouds seemed to snag on the penthouse levels, as if the building was trying to scratch the heavens. They slipped in through the service entrance, Esperanza in her cleaning blues, Mateo clutching a frayed backpack holding that dumpster rescue laptop with months of his life coded onto the drive. "Keep your head down," Esperanza hissed. "Don't make eye contact. If anyone asks, you're my helper today. The floor supervisor owes me one." Mateo nodded, but he couldn't stop staring. The polished marble floors, the screens mounting every wall, the suits power-walking while barking into their phones. It was a different planet. They took the freight elevator up to the 47th floor. When the doors slid open, Mateo held his breath. This was the belly of the beast, the place where decisions were made that rippled out to affect thousands of lives. Esperanza ushered him quickly into a janitor's closet just off the main conference hall. "Stay put," she hushed, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "I have to go scrub the executive washrooms. We'll figure out the rest when I'm done." But sitting still wasn't in Mateo's nature. Through the crack in the closet door, he had a clear line of sight into the boardroom, and the view made his pulse hammer against his ribs. A massive screen dominated the room, displaying the exact code sequences he'd been obsessing over for months. The uncrackable security glitch haunting Vertex Global. Around the table, 11 suits were at each other's throats. He couldn't help himself. He leaned in closer just as Lorenzo Castellanos, the CEO, slammed his fist onto the mahogany table. The man radiated authority. That tailored suit alone probably cost more than Esperanza's entire annual salary. "We have been at this for 6 months," his voice thundered. 6 months! I hired the sharpest minds on Earth, and not one of you has plugged this leak. Regina Vargas, the COO, cut in, her eyes pointy. "Mr. Castellanos, our teams are grinding 24/7. The issue is the architect behind this attack. They are a genius. We're dealing with unprecedented logic here. I don't care if it's a genius or a Martian." Castellanos shot up from his chair, face flushed with rage. "If this isn't fixed by Friday, the government contract is toast. Do you understand the gravity of that? $1 billion. $1 billion. Professor Gabriel Navarro, an outside cybersecurity consultant, spoke up, his voice measured and calm. "With all due respect, sir, your team isn't incompetent. The problem is the code itself. It follows a logic that defies standard conventions. The creator, they are wired differently." "Then go find me a freak who thinks like them," Castellanos snarled. "I've offered a $100,000 bounty to anyone who can crack this. And still, nobody on the planet can do it." Mateo's heart pounded so hard he was sure it was echoing across the boardroom. He knew the fix. He'd spent endless nights dissecting that code, tracing the patterns, seeing the invisible logic everyone else missed. But he was just a kid, a poor kid, invisible. He stepped back to retreat into the shadows, but his backpack snagged the janitorial cart. A sharp metallic clatter shattered the hallway's silence. Every head in the boardroom snapped in his direction. Regina Vargas reacted first, rising with a look of pure revulsion. "What is a child doing in here? Where is security?" Mateo froze. He wanted to run, to vanish into thin air, but his feet were lead. Lorenzo Castellanos glared at him with that specific mix of annoyance and disdain powerful men save for the insignificant. "You there! Who are you? What are you doing in my building?" I... The words stuck in his throat. "It's the cleaning lady's son," someone muttered, dripping with snobbery. Stifled chuckles rippled through the room. Each laugh hit Mateo like a physical slap across the face. "Get him out of my sight," Castellanos ordered, sitting back down, "and dock a day's pay from whoever dragged him in here." 2 guards were already closing in when something inside Mateo snapped. But it wasn't his spirit that broke, it was his fear. "I can fix it." The words tumbled out before he could catch them, clear, steady, and impossible to ignore. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a man. Only the hum of the AC dared to make a sound. Castellanos swiveled his chair slowly, eyes narrowing. "Excuse me?" "The security breach." Mateo pointed a trembling finger at the screen. "I can solve it." Regina Vargas let out a laugh that shattered the tension like broken glass. "Is this a joke? Some street rat thinks he can outsmart the world's top experts? I'm not a street rat." Mateo surprised himself with the steel in his voice. "I'm poor. There's a difference." More snickers, more sneers. But Castellanos held up a hand, silencing the room instantly. There was a glint in his eye. Not respect, not even curiosity. It was amusement. The dark amusement of a cat toying with a mouse before the kill. "All right, kid." He leaned back, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Entertain me. Tell me what you think you know about my $100 million headache." Mateo took a deep breath. He thought of his grandmother scrubbing floors just yards away, oblivious to the danger. He thought of the sleepless nights hunched over his ancient laptop, and all the dreams that felt like fantasies. "The code has a hidden signature," he began, his voice finding its footing. "It's not a standard brute force attack. It's a puzzle. The creator isn't trying to destroy the system, they're trying to prove a point." Professor Navarro leaned in, his skepticism shifting to intrigue. "Go on." "The pattern loops every 73 lines, but with a 3-character variance." Line up the glitches and the true pattern jumps right out at you. You guys are chasing ghosts. The flaw isn't in the shield, it's baked right into the weapon itself. The room went dead quiet. The sneering stopped, replaced by the heavy air of total shock. Navarro stood up, locking eyes with the boy. Where did you get that? It's not public. I spent months digging through it on a rig my abuela pulled out of a dumpster. Bullshit, Regina hissed. No street kid with 0 degrees could crack code this deep. I never set foot in a lecture hall. Mateo didn't blink. But nobody handed me anything, so nobody can take away what I taught myself. Castellano rose. His heels clicked against the marble like a ticking clock until he towered over Mateo, staring down like the boy was a fascinating little cockroach. $100,000. Fix it, and it's yours. He dragged out every syllable. Right here, right now, in front of the board. Mateo felt the heat of 11 pairs of eyes burning into his skin. He heard the stifled laughs, saw the cruel smirks, but then his gaze caught something else. A small shadow in the hallway. His grandmother, mop in hand, silent tears tracking through the dust on her cheeks. Their eyes locked, and in that gaze Mateo didn't find fear. He didn't see shame. He saw pure pride, unshakable faith, the fierce love of a woman who scrubbed floors her whole life so he could stand in this room. Mateo straightened his spine. I need a terminal. Castellano gestured to the sleek beast of a machine resting on the mahogany table. Be my guest, kid. Show us you're not just talk. Mateo walked toward the leather throne that looked big enough to swallow him whole. The executives leaned back, ready to watch a public execution. None of them realized they were about to witness a moment that would rewrite their history. Because sometimes genius doesn't come wrapped in Ivy League diplomas or famous last names. Sometimes it walks in wearing scuffed sneakers, carrying a beat-up backpack heavy with dreams. His hands shook slightly as he sank into the executive chair. The butter-soft leather and the scent of expensive polish were a sharp slap in the face, a reminder that he was an alien in this world of wealth. Dual monitors loomed in front of him, bathing his face in a cool, artificial blue glow. The same code he'd dissected on a laggy junker was now crisp and clear on hardware worth more than his grandmother's annual wages. Lorenzo Castellano crossed his arms, that shark-like grin still plastered on his face. 30 minutes, boy. Not a second more. Technically, the bounty had no timer. Mateo didn't look up. The public listing didn't mention a countdown. And the listing didn't invite street rats to break into my tower. Castellano leaned in close, the smell of premium espresso hot against Mateo's ear. My boardroom, my rules. 30 minutes or security drags you and your abuela out by your hair, and I'll make sure no one in this city hires her to scrub a toilet ever again. Mateo's blood ran cold. The fear wasn't for his own pride anymore. It was her livelihood. The electric bill. The rent for the tiny apartment they could barely keep. He shot a glance at the hallway where Esperanza had been standing. Empty. A manager must have yelled at her to get back to work, unaware her grandson was gambling their entire existence. Clocks ticking. Regina Vargas hummed the words, inspecting her flawless manicure with theatrical boredom. Mateo squeezed his eyes shut, one deep breath, then his fingers hovered over the keys. The first few minutes were just survival. The live Vertex global system was a beast compared to the fragments he'd scraped together at home. Hidden firewalls, ghost protocols, architecture that twisted in ways that shouldn't be possible. But Mateo didn't think like a corporate engineer. He never had. Where they saw raw data and syntax, he saw a rhythm. While the prose played by the rulebook, he read the negative space, the silence between the notes of a digital symphony. Professor Navarro drifted closer, peering over Mateo's shoulder, his skepticism turning into awe. He's coming at it from a completely different angle, he whispered. Different how? Augusto Medina, the company shark, asked with a frown. We've been trying to plaster over the crack from the outside. He's walking right through the front door the hacker used. Regina scoffed. Great. So the janitor's kid is hacking us now? I'm not hacking anything. Mateo kept typing, his voice barely rising above the clatter of the keys. I'm following the breadcrumbs. The architect left a trail. It's like tracking footprints in a blizzard. Every step leaves a mark. This code is full of them if you know where to look. 15 minutes. Half his time had just evaporated. A cold bead of sweat trickled down Mateo's temple. The system was fighting back harder than he had expected. Every time he thought he had the pattern pinned down, the architecture shifted. Another layer, another trapdoor, another dead end. In the back of the room, the executives were checking out, scrolling through their phones and whispering about lunch reservations. To the suits, this was just a matinee show. a little amusement before they watched a street kid crash and burn for daring to step out of his place. But Professor Navarro wasn't looking at his watch. His eyes were glued to the monitor, his skepticism melting into something that looked a lot like awe. "Good Lord," he breathed. "He's actually locking onto the signal." Castellanos, who had been thumbing out an email, snapped his head up. "Excuse me?" "The boy. He's isolating the sequence," Navarro said, jabbing a finger toward the display. "Look at that progression right there. We wrote that off as static months ago, but it's not random noise, it's syntax." Mateo paused, his fingers freezing for the first time. "The person who built this didn't want to burn Vertex Global to the ground," Mateo said softly. "They left a back door. They wanted someone to knock, someone who didn't think like a corporate machine." The atmosphere in the boardroom shifted instantly from mockery to high-wire tension. 20 minutes remaining. The entire schematic was clicking into place in Mateo's mind like a three-dimensional map, every gear turning the next, revealing a picture the experts had missed. Then he hit the wall. The final tumbler required a key he didn't possess, access to the deep-level historical logs. Clearances strictly for the gods in the penthouse. "I need the archives, Professor," Mateo said, his voice tight. "Out of the question," Regina barked, cutting in immediately. "That database holds sensitive client profiles. We are not handing the keys to a stray from the slums. Without those files, the sequence is dead." "Then I guess the circus is leaving town," Regina said, a smug little smile playing on her lips. "Fun while it lasted, kid." Castellanos leaned back, studying the tableau with cold calculation. He hadn't built a billion-dollar dynasty by playing it safe. He had wagered entire fortunes on gut instinct when everyone else called him crazy. Watching this intruder, this anomaly, he felt a spark he hadn't felt in a decade. Doubt. "Authorize him," Lorenzo commanded. Regina gasped. "That is a massive security breach. I said authorize him. It's my name on the building, Regina." Her lips pressed into a thin, white line of suppressed rage, but she marched to the secondary terminal and hammered in her credentials. "You're in, boy. 5 minutes. This better not be a waste of bandwidth." Mateo didn't waste breath on a reply. His eyes tore through the scrolling logs at a velocity that made the observers dizzy just watching. Gigabytes of data rushed past like a digital torrent, a chaotic flood only he could navigate. Then it appeared. The hidden rhythm. The ghost in the machine he had been chasing for months. 3 minutes. His hands blurred over the keyboard, cascading streams of fresh command lines onto the projection. The executives abandoned their apathy, rising from their leather chairs drawn toward the screen like moths to a light. 2 minutes. Professor Navarro was mumbling to himself, tracing the air as he followed Mateo's logic. That's theoretically impossible. Those protocols don't mix. And yet, he's weaving them together. 1 minute. Mateo's heart hammered against his ribs so hard it drowned out the hum of the servers. His fingers trembled but didn't falter. Every keystroke was a lifeline. 30 seconds. Regina began a cruel countdown, checking her watch. 20, 15, 10. Mateo slammed the final key. The room plummeted into silence. On the massive central display, the error loop that had cost them millions of dollars and sleepless nights simply vanished. A calm, steady text replaced the red alert. "Vulnerability neutralized. System secure." No one breathed. The air in the room felt frozen. Navarro broke the spell first, collapsing into the nearest seat and dragging his hands down his face. "He cleared it," he wheezed, his voice barely audible. "The kid actually cleared it." Regina stared at the monitor as if she had seen a corpse sit up. The blood drained from her face. "It's a glitch. There has to be some kind of override trick." "No tricks," Navarro said, straightening his tie and reclaiming his professional dignity. "I can run the diagnostics, Madame Vargas, but I can tell you right now, that fix is not just legitimate. It's elegant." Castellanos hadn't moved a muscle. He stood like a statue, his gaze locked on Mateo, really looking at him for the first time. And perhaps he was right to stare. Because the shivering boy in front of him wasn't just some street rat who had snuck past security anymore. He had just inadvertently humiliated the entire IT division of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. How? The word stuck in Castellanos' throat like it was physically painful to admit. How does a kid with no degree, no resources, literally nothing, fix what my top engineers couldn't touch in 6 months? Mateo held his gaze. There was no defiance in it. No ego, either. Just the raw transparency of someone with nothing to hide. Your experts were trying to play by the rules. I don't know the rule book. I just see a broken system and figure out how to put it back together. That's absurd, Regina snapped. Academic protocols exist for a reason. You can't just toss out 50 years of computer science and expect— Ms. Vargas. Navarro cut her off, his tone leaving zero room for argument. With all due respect, I just watched this boy do the exact thing you claimed was impossible. Maybe the issue isn't his lack of a degree. Maybe the issue is that our degrees have blind spots we're too arrogant to admit. Suddenly, the boardroom doors flew open. Heads turned. There was Esperanza, crumpled cleaning smock, face wet with tears, fighting off a security guard twice her size. "Let her go!" Mateo shot up from his seat. "Ma'am, this is a restricted area." The guard tried to hold the line. "That's my grandson," Esperanza screamed. "They told me you were arresting him. Please, don't hurt him." "He's just a baby." "Enough." Castellanos' voice sliced through the noise like a razor blade. The guard froze. Esperanza stood still, locking eyes with Mateo across the polished mahogany table. Seeing her there, so small, so fragile against these corporate titans in their $1,000 suits, something inside Mateo just snapped. This was the woman who raised him single-handedly, who scrubbed floors on double shifts so he wouldn't starve, who dug a broken laptop out of a dumpster just because she knew he loved to learn. And these men, these people who had the world on a platter, they had the nerve to treat her like dirt. "Mr. Castellanos." Mateo's voice shook, barely holding back the rage. "Keep your promise. I earned that money." Castellanos studied the boy for a long, quiet minute. Then a slow clap, one solitary set of hands clapping in the dead silence of the boardroom. "You're right, son. You earned every single penny." Regina started to object, but one look from Castellanos shut her down instantly. "But let me ask you something." He walked toward Mateo, measuring every step. $100,000. That's it? That's all you want? A one-time payout for a miracle? Mateo frowned, confused by the shift. "That's life-changing money for us." "It's pocket lint to me." Castellanos stopped right in front of him. "Listen, kid, what you just pulled off isn't worth $100 grand. It's worth millions. That contract you salvaged, that's more wealth than your family would see in 10 lifetimes. "I didn't do it for the cash," Mateo shot back. "I did it because I could, because the puzzle was there, and I wanted to solve it." A flicker of something new appeared in Castellanos' eyes. For the first time since Mateo walked in, the sneer vanished completely. "That's exactly how I used to think at your age," he said, voice dropping low. "Before the world taught me everything has a price tag." He spun around to face his staff. "Augusto, draw up the paperwork. I want this kid brought on as a special consultant for Vertex Global. Annual salary, not a one-off bonus, and throw in a full-ride scholarship, any university, anywhere he wants." The room erupted into disbelief. "Lorenzo, this is insane," Regina protested. "He's a minor. He has 0 credentials." The shareholders will be thrilled when I tell them we fixed the glitch that was about to tank our IPO. Castellanos didn't even glance her way. "And if anyone has a problem with that, have your resignation letter on my desk by 8 a.m. Esperanza, still frozen by the door, finally managed to speak. "What? What is going on?" Mateo rushed over, grabbing her calloused hands. "Abuela, I did it. I fixed it. And I think they want to give me a job?" "A job?" Esperanza looked back and forth between her grandson and the suits, her brain unable to compute the scene. "But you're just a boy. You're just my little boy." "Ma'am?" Professor Navarro approached, his face full of genuine respect. "Your little boy just accomplished something the brightest tech minds on Earth couldn't handle. You should be incredibly proud." Esperanza looked at Navarro, then at Mateo. The dam broke. Tears streamed down her face, not from fear or shame this time, but from pure, overwhelming pride. She pulled her grandson into a crushing hug with her weary arms, sobbing into his shoulder as he held her up. "Your grandfather was right," she whispered through the tears. "You don't wait for miracles, you hunt them down." But while the boardroom began to buzz with the electric hum of contracts and sudden opportunity, no one noticed Regina Vargas slipping away into the shadows. No one saw her hands trembling as she furiously tapped out a message on her phone. And no one heard the venomous promise she whispered just as the elevator doors slid shut, cutting her off from the celebration. "This isn't over, kid. It's just starting. Because in the world of the untouchables, humiliation is a debt we don't forgive, and there are secrets some people would kill to keep buried." The news tore through the hallways of Vertex Global faster than a stock market crash. Within minutes, every soul in the building knew that a street kid had just pulled off the impossible. The whispers jumped from cubicle to cubicle, climbing floor by floor, warping with every retelling until the truth sounded more like an urban legend. Carmen Lucero, a middle-aged woman who worked the cleaning shift alongside Doña Esperanza, had been the one to sprint over and warn her that her grandson was in deep trouble. She'd overheard the security guards radioing about an unauthorized minor in the boardroom on floor 47, and her gut instantly told her it had to be her coworker's boy. Now, Carmen stood in the corridor, watching Esperanza and Mateo hold onto each other tight in the middle of a room full of baffled millionaires. Silent tears tracked through the dust on her cheeks as she witnessed something she never thought she'd see in a building where the working class was usually invisible. The underdog hadn't just survived, he'd won. Lorenzo Castellanos leaned in close to his personal assistant, his voice low but leaving no room for argument. "I want the entire legal team here in 1 hour. Have them draft the most bulletproof contract of their lives and get the best tech academy in the country on the line. This kid is getting the education he was denied." "Mr. Castellanos?" Augusto Medina, the corporate attorney, stepped in looking anxious. "We need to talk about the liability issues here. A minor cannot sign binding agreements without a legal guardian. And the insurance implications, well, his grandmother will sign as the guardian. Iron out the details, Augusto. That's why I pay you the big bucks." Medina nodded, though the look on his face suggested the headache was going to be far bigger than Castellanos wanted to admit. Meanwhile, Professor Gabriel Navarro had approached Mateo with the hunger of a scientist staring at a new discovery. The man who had spent a lifetime dissecting cybersecurity systems was absolutely floored by what he had just seen. "Mateo, right?" he asked, his tone gentle. "Walk me through your brain for a second. The approach you took, it defies every established methodology I know." Mateo, still gripping his grandmother's hand, eyed the academic warily. "I don't have a method, I just see it differently." "Differently how?" "The numbers talk to me." Mateo looked down at his sneakers like he was confessing a crime. "I know it sounds crazy, but when I look at code, I don't see symbols, I see patterns, colors, shapes. It's like music. Every line has a melody, and when something is broken, the song goes off key." Navarro shot a knowing look at Castellanos. They both realized exactly what they were dealing with. Synesthesia fused with genius-level intellect. A combination so rare it was practically mythical. "Where did you learn to code?" Navarro pressed. "Online. Videos, forums, free tutorials. My grandma scraped enough together for a computer, and I did the rest. Just the internet. No teachers. Teachers cost money." Mateo said it with a matter-of-fact simplicity that sucked the air out of the room. "Internet is free at the public library." Esperanza squeezed her grandson's hand harder. Every word he spoke was a stinging reminder of what she couldn't give him, of every door slammed in their faces just because they didn't have the right zip code. But it was also proof of his grit, how he'd turned every stumbling block into a stepping stone. The boardroom doors swung open, revealing a man Mateo hadn't seen yet. Tall, with a face carved from granite and a badge identifying him as the head of corporate security. "Mr. Castellanos, a word. Now, what is it, Colonel Fuentes?" The man, an ex-military operator who treated corporate security like a war zone, scanned the room with paranoia before speaking. "It's about the code the kid just cracked. Our analysts ran a routine backtrace and found something disturbing." "What kind of disturbing?" "The vulnerability he exploited to get into our system? It wasn't a standard external hack, it had an internal signature." The silence that crashed down on the room was heavier than before. This wasn't just awkwardness anymore, it was danger. "Are you telling me someone inside Vertex built that back door?" Castellanos dragged the words out, heavy with implication. "You mean to tell me the architect of this mess had clearance levels that don't just get handed out to the rank and file? They knew the blueprints, the fail-safes, the skeleton of the entire network. We aren't looking at a brute force attack from some kid in a basement, sir. This is an inside job." A cold shiver crawled down Mateo's spine. Even while he was wrestling with the script earlier, a part of him had known the pieces fit together a little too smoothly. It was too clean. Every snare and loop was custom-built to slip past Vertex's specific firewalls, the kind of surgical precision you don't get from a stranger guessing at the locks. "Give me a name." Castellanos' tone dropped, turning the air in the room into ice. "Not yet, sir, but I'm advising a total lockdown on this intel. We start a quiet audit immediately, but until we have a target, this doesn't leave the room. Are we clear?" Castellanos swept his gaze across the boardroom, wearing a look that promised ruin to anyone who crossed him. This conversation never happened. If a whisper of this gets out, you won't just lose your jobs. My lawyers will make sure you lose everything else too. Understood? Heads bobbed in terrified unison. But Mateo caught a detail the suits missed. A junior aide, the one who had been quietly transcribing the meeting, was thumbing a text message beneath the mahogany surface of the table. Her eyes were darting around like a trapped bird, and the second she locked eyes with Mateo, the phone vanished into her pocket with guilty speed. A bad feeling settled in his gut. The next few hours dissolved into a blur of chaotic motion. Suits from legal swarmed in carrying stacks of paperwork, followed closely by HR reps armed with enough liability waivers to drown a small village. Down in the lobby, the press vultures started circling, sensing blood in the water, summoned by leaks from staffers who couldn't keep their mouths shut about the miracle kid they had just watched in action. Mateo and Esperanza were ushered into a plush executive suite, suddenly treated like royalty with gourmet snacks and soft chairs while the contracts were drafted. Carmen Lucero had insisted on sticking by her friend's side, and in the confusion, nobody had the heart or the nerve to tell her to get back to work. She sat knee to knee with Esperanza now, gripping her hand tight as they both tried to wrap their heads around the madness. "I'm still waiting to wake up, Carmen," she whispered. "When I came running to find you, I was terrified they were going to put cuffs on him. I thought he was in trouble, not saving the day." "My Mateo isn't like other boys," Esperanza said, her voice swelling with that specific kind of grandmotherly pride. "Even as a baby, he noticed things people ignored. He takes after his father that way, a brilliant mind that was always racing, always hungry." At the mention of his father, the light in Esperanza's face dimmed, replaced by the heavy shadow of old grief. "My son spent his life on construction sites because the world never gave him the chance to be anything else. He was a genius with numbers, with engines, with anything mechanical. But without a degree, society just saw another pair of hands to haul bricks and pour concrete." Carmen asked gently, "What happened?" "Site accident. The developers cut corners on safety gear to save a few pennies. Because we were nobody, our complaints were invisible. No one listened, no one helped. His mother, she broke under the weight of it. A few months later, she walked out into the night and simply ceased to exist for us." Carmen wrapped her arms around her friend, holding her as silent tears traced paths down their weathered cheeks. "That's why I made a vow," Esperanza continued, her voice trembling. Mateo was going to break the cycle. Every single peso I scraped together went into his future. Every floor I scrubbed, every extra shift I took, it was all to buy him a way out. And the day I found that broken computer in the dumpster behind the tech park, I knew. It was a sign. The universe was finally giving me the tool to give my grandson the life his father was denied. Across the suite, Mateo stood with his forehead against the cool glass, looking out over the sprawl. From this height, the humanity down below was reduced to ants, the gridlocked traffic looking like scattered toy cars. It was a different planet up here, far removed from the dust and noise of his neighborhood. Professor Navarro approached, balancing 2 steaming mugs of hot cocoa. "Figured you could use a sugar rush after the mental marathon," he said. Mateo took the mug, offering a shy, grateful smile. "Thanks, Professor. Please, call me Gabriel." They sat in a comfortable silence, watching the metropolis stretch out beneath them, a vast ocean of blinking lights and long shadows. "Mind if I pick your brain for a second?" Navarro asked. "Go ahead. Back there, when you were dismantling the virus, you said the creator wanted to be caught. What made you say that?" Mateo took a slow sip, organizing the data in his head. The architecture had layers, dozens of them, but it wasn't chaotic. Every function led to the next one with a purpose. It was a trail of breadcrumbs. The architect wasn't just trying to break the system, they were inviting someone to follow them down the rabbit hole. Navarro pressed, "And what was at the bottom?" "A signature buried in the syntax. When I aligned the variable drifts, they formed a sentence." Navarro leaned in, his curiosity spiking. "What did it say?" Mateo hesitated, clutching the mug tighter. He had seen the text flash across his terminal, but sharing it in a room full of suits had felt wrong. His gut told him that those words were dangerous currency. It read, "For the one who sees what others miss. The truth is buried deep in the bedrock. You have to dig where people refuse to look." Navarro went quiet, letting the gravity of the statement sink in. "Have you shared this with anyone else?" "No, only you." "Good. Let's keep a lid on it for the time being. Before they could say another word, the heavy office door swung open. Lorenzo Castellanos strode in, flanked by a pair of attorneys weighed down by stacks of legal binders. "Mateo, Doña Esperanza, the paperwork is finalized. If everything looks correct to you, we can proceed with signatures immediately." Esperanza approached the mahogany desk, her gait hesitant and small against the vastness of the room. Her entire life had been a series of signatures on papers she barely comprehended. Employment terms that stripped away her rights, agreements written to serve the masters while she scraped by. But this moment felt different. She needed certainty. "May I read them through?" The request seemed to catch Castellanos off guard, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before he nodded his consent. "By all means, take as much time as you require." As Esperanza parsed the dense paragraphs with Professor Navarro's guidance, translating legalese into plain speech, Mateo felt a sharp buzz against his thigh. It was odd. His number wasn't exactly public knowledge. The screen displayed an unsaved contact. "Do not sign anything. You are being exploited. They are hiding the truth about your father. Get out of the building immediately." Mateo's pulse hammered to a halt. His father. The text explicitly referenced his dad. What was the implication? He glanced around the polished office. Castellanos was murmuring something to his legal team. Navarro was busy decoding a clause for his grandmother, while Carmen stood by, eyes wide, soaking in the spectacle of corporate wealth. The scene appeared perfectly mundane, yet the device in his pocket felt like a live coal against his skin. Someone out there held a piece of the puzzle regarding his father. An invisible observer wanted him enlightened, and was desperate to stop him from inking that deal with Vertex Global. Who was behind the screen? How had they even acquired his contact info? And what buried secret about his father could possibly tie into this corporate merger? Mateo stared out the floor-to-ceiling glass at the sprawling city below. Only a few hours prior, his biggest anxiety had been scavenging time on decent hardware. Now, he found himself entangled in a web far vaster and more perilous than he could have ever conceived. The algorithm he bade cracked wasn't merely a cyber intrusion. It was a signal, a beckoning hand. Somewhere out there, amidst that metropolis of neon and darkness, a stranger was waiting for his move. But first, he had to unearth the reality behind the code, behind Vertex Global, and the father who was little more than a faded memory. A man whose death, it seemed, might not have been the tragic workplace mishap the family had always been sold. "Mateo?" His grandmother's voice pierced his reverie. "Are you all right, son?" He shoved the phone deep into his pocket and plastered on a smile. "Yeah, Grandma. Just a bit drained, that's all." Yet, as he watched her pen the signature that promised to alter their destiny, Mateo couldn't shake the gnawing fear. Were they stepping into salvation or walking blindly into a snare? Meanwhile, somewhere deep within the structure, Regina Vargas watched a notification light up her screen. Message delivered. The boy knows. Now, it was a waiting game. A smile played on her lips in the shadowy office. The real match had just kicked off. Sleep evaded Mateo entirely that night. The warning from the stranger seared his consciousness, festering like an open wound that refused to clot. Whenever he squeezed his eyes shut, the text blazed behind his lids as if branded in fire. "Is there something they haven't told you about your father?" The cramped apartment he shared with his grandmother had never felt this oppressively quiet. Esperanza was asleep in the next room, completely spent from the emotional roller coaster of what was arguably the biggest day of their lives. The inked contracts sat on the kitchen table, silent heralds of a future that felt suspiciously perfect. $100,000. A consultancy retainer, a full-ride scholarship to the nation's premier tech institute. Every wild dream they'd ever harbored, now reduced to ink and official seals on crisp paper, yet Mateo couldn't bring himself to pop the champagne. Not just yet. He pulled up a chair to his battered rig, that Frankenstein machine salvaged from scrapyards that had served as his only portal to the outside world. His fingers trembled over the keys as he initiated a search he'd never had the courage to run before. Accident, construction, laborer, fatality. He typed the keywords into the search bar, appending his father's name at the end. The results loaded sluggishly on the antiquated monitor. Local news clippings, municipal records, workplace safety incident reports. Mateo combed through them methodically, devouring every syllable as if his survival hung in the balance. The incident took place at a corporate high-rise development. A scaffolding collapse had sent 3 laborers plummeting to the ground. His father was the sole casualty. But there was a detail buried in the text, something Mateo had never noticed before. A brief, almost throwaway mention in a sidebar article noted that the site was part of an aggressive expansion for a burgeoning tech giant. The name of the corporation made the blood freeze in Mateo's veins. Vertex Global. His hands shook uncontrollably as he scrolled further down the page. The report spelled it out in black and white. The corporation had settled out of court with the grieving families, and attached to that check was a strict gag order. Hush money. That's what it was. His own grandmother had been bought off. No, he refused to believe it. Mateo slammed the laptop shut, the plastic casing groaning under the force. His breath hitched, loud and jagged in the sudden quiet of the bedroom. Every story he'd ever been told about his father's passing was dissolving, washing away like wet sand in a high tide. She knew. All these years, she carried this weight, dodging every question he ever asked. A floorboard creaked outside, snapping him out of the spiral. Esperanza stood in the doorway, her face a map of sleepless nights and low-level anxiety. "Mijo, it's late. Why are you still up?" Mateo just stared at her. This was the woman who scraped her knuckles raw to keep him fed, who broke her back so he could stand tall. He couldn't just point a finger at her. She was his foundation. But he needed the facts. "Abuela, why did you never tell me the real story about how Dad died?" Esperanza froze. The blood left her face so fast she looked like she'd seen the dead walking. "What are you talking about, son? It was an accident. You know that. I know it happened at a construction site. What I didn't know was that the site belonged to Vertex Global." The silence that hung between them said more than 1,000 guilty pleas. Her legs gave out and she sank into the nearest chair, eyes swimming with tears held back for decades. "How did you find out?" "I got a text. Said there were missing pieces to the story. Pieces you never gave me." "Who sent it?" "No idea. Blocked number. But they weren't lying, were they? Vertex Global is responsible for his death." "It wasn't that black and white." A sob escaped her throat. The scaffolding collapsed. The contractors cut corners with cheap junk. Vertex just owned the building, but when we tried to fight them, their lawyers buried us. We were nobody to them, just poor, uneducated people in the way. They waved a check in our faces and told us to sign. They said if we fought, they'd drag it out in court until we starved, and we'd walk away with nothing. How much was my father worth to them? $20,000? She couldn't even look him in the eye. $20,000 for my son's life, and I took it because I had nowhere else to turn. I had a little boy to raise and empty pockets. The room seemed to tilt. The very corporation handing him a golden ticket to the future was the same machine that chewed up his family years ago. And Lorenzo Castellanos, the man who praised his mind, was the signature at the bottom of that hush money contract. "Why keep me in the dark?" His voice cracked. "Why let me walk into their offices blind? Because I didn't want you poisoned by hate, mijo." She reached out, gripping his hands tight. "I couldn't let your gifts rot under the weight of a grudge. I wanted you to build a life defined by your potential, not your pain. But I just signed on with them. I took their paycheck. How am I supposed to work for the people who killed Dad? That logo didn't kill him. Negligence did. Being poor did. A broken system that treats workers like disposable parts did. Castellanos probably doesn't even know your name, but God knows I know his." Dawn broke gray and cold, finding Mateo perched on the roof of their tenement, watching the city grind into gear. Downstairs, his grandmother had finally passed out, drained by the tears and the heavy truth that changed everything overnight. His pocket buzzed. Another text from the mystery number. "You found what you were looking for." "There's more. The accident wasn't an accident. Cafe Aurora, 10 a.m. Come alone." A cold shiver ran down his spine. Not an accident? What the hell did that mean? Part of him wanted to run downstairs and tell her, or call the cops, or just delete the text and focus on his career, but he was past the point of no return. If there was even a 1% chance his father was murdered rather than unlucky, he had to chase it. He owed it to the ghost in his memory. He owed it to himself. Cafe Aurora was a dive in a part of town Mateo knew like the back of his hand. It sat just a few blocks from the public library where he'd spent endless afternoons teaching himself to code on slow computers. Home turf. That made him feel a little less like a target. He showed up 10 minutes early, snagging a table by the window, strategic view of the door, clear path to the exit if things went sideways. 10 o'clock sharp. The door chime jingled. Mateo was half expecting some noir shadow in a trench coat. Reality, as usual, was underwhelming. A woman, maybe 40, Brown hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, dressed in bland clothes designed to blend into the wallpaper. But her eyes were sharp, carrying that manic focus Mateo recognized in the mirror when he was deep in a complex algorithm. She slid into the seat opposite him without a word. Mateo Ríos. About time. Who are you? Name's Daniela Herrera. I spent 8 years inside the belly of the beast at Vertex Global. I used to be a systems engineer for their core development team. Used to being the operative word. I got the axe 3 months ago. On paper, it was downsizing. In reality, I dug up something they wanted buried. Mateo eyed her warily. What's that got to do with me? Daniela pulled a folder from her bag and slapped it onto the table. Your dad, Rodrigo Ríos? His death wasn't an accident. The statement hit Mateo like a gut punch. What are you talking about? I'm telling you that scaffolding didn't collapse because of cheap parts. Someone rigged it. That's insane. Why would anyone target a bunch of construction workers? They weren't after the crew. They were after your father. The room spun. Mateo felt the floor drop out from under him. My dad was just a bricklayer. Why would anyone want him dead? Daniela flipped the folder open, spreading out photos and printed emails. He wasn't just a laborer, Mateo. He had your mind. He'd haul concrete by day, but at night, he was teaching himself to code. He built a groundbreaking cybersecurity algorithm and was shopping it around to the big players. My dad was a coder? Self-taught, just like you. Guess genius runs in the blood. One of the places he pitched was Vertex Global. Lorenzo Castellanos even took the meeting himself. Castellanos met him, looked him in the eye, and officially turned him down. But 6 months after your dad was buried, Vertex rolled out a security system that was a carbon copy of his work, the very system that put them on top. Mateo stared at the papers, his mind refusing to accept it. His father wasn't just muscle, he was an inventor, and Castellanos had looted his legacy from the grave. You're telling me Castellanos had my father murdered just to steal his code? I can't prove the hit yet, but I can prove the code belonged to your dad. Plus, I've got statements from the crew, guys who saw suits lurking around the scaffolding the night before it fell. Why are you telling me this now? Daniela locked eyes with him. Because that bug that hit Vertex Global? The one you patched yesterday? I wrote it. Mateo was stunned. You engineered the crash? I said it as a trap. I knew Castellanos' ego wouldn't let him admit defeat. He'd offer a public bounty, and sooner or later, real talent would step up to claim it. I just didn't expect it to be you. I never guessed it would be Rodrigo's son. The comment in the script, the truth lies in the foundation. That's what you meant. I meant the original site, the building where your father died. There's evidence down in that foundation that proves everything, but it's buried under tons of steel and concrete now, totally out of reach. So, what's the point? Why tell me if we can't prove a thing? Daniela cracked a smile for the first time. Because you've got the one thing I never did. Access. You're inside Vertex Global now. You can walk through doors that were shut to me, see files I couldn't touch. You want me to be your mole. I want you to find out what really happened to your dad. What you do with that intel is up to you. Mateo looked down at the chaos on the table. Photos of his father he'd never seen, complex logic flows, scrawled in handwriting that looked hauntingly like his own. It was a whole life that had been kept in the dark. His dad wasn't just a casualty of some construction mishap. He was a genius who got robbed of his work, and then his life. And Lorenzo Castellanos, the man promising to be Mateo's savior, was likely the one holding the smoking gun. If I get caught, I lose it all, Mateo finally said. The contract, the scholarship, the cash. My grandmother's counting on me. I know. That's why I'm leaving it to you. You can take the $100,000, grab the scholarship, and live the easy life. Or you can dig for the truth and risk everything for justice you might never get. Mateo closed his eyes. He thought of the man he barely knew, the stranger whose blood was pumping through his own veins. He thought of his grandma and everything she'd given up for him. He thought about the code he cracked, the hidden breadcrumb he found. He remembered what his grandma told him just last night, that she didn't want him consumed by hate, that his gift should be used for something bigger than a grudge. But could he just turn a blind eye? Could he really work for the man who might have destroyed his family? I need time to think, he finally said. I get it, but time isn't on your side, Mateo. Regina Vargas knows I reached out, and if she knows, it won't be long before Castellanos does too. Regina Vargas isn't just the COO. She's Castellanos' fixer, his hatchet woman. She's been burying his bodies for years, including that hush money deal they forced on your grandmother. Suddenly, the fog lifted for Mateo. Every confused moment clicked into place with a sickening thud. She played me. She knew exactly who I was from the second I walked in. The name gave it away. As soon as she heard it in the boardroom, the walls went up. That explains the immediate aggression. That's why she tried to boot you before you could crack the code. It all makes terrifying sense now. Her rage, the way she tried to crush you publicly, that cryptic text, none of it was random. Walking into Vertex Global wasn't chance. It was either destiny or a setup. Look, how do I know you're not playing me too? Mateo pressed harder. How do I know this isn't just another corporate game? Daniela didn't answer with words. She pulled one last photo from her file. A young woman beamed back from the glossy paper, clutching an infant. "That's my sister," she said softly. She was an admin assistant at Vertex. She stumbled onto some shady construction ledgers and threatened to blow the whistle. 30 days later, her car went off the road. Straight highway, dry pavement, clear skies, no reason to crash. She died instantly. So did my 2-year-old niece. Daniela's eyes welled up. "I don't need your trust, Mateo. I need you to find the truth. Do it for your dad. Do it for my sister. Do it for every life Castellanos ground into dust to build his kingdom." Mateo stared at the image. A mother and child. Wiped out. Just collateral damage. "How many others?" he whispered. "How many families did they ruin?" "I don't know," she replied. "But we can find out." Mateo gazed out of the cafe window. The city moved on, oblivious, business as usual outside, while his entire reality had just shattered. He'd walked into Vertex chasing $500,000 and a shot at the big leagues. Instead, he found a death sentence. The truth about his father, a corporation built on blood, and a choice that would define him forever. Take the money and look away, or burn it all down for justice. His pocket buzzed. New message, unknown number. But he knew who it was, Regina Vargas. "I know who you're with. I know what she said. We need to talk. Your grandmother is in play." Mateo's blood ran cold. This wasn't a coding competition anymore. It was life or death. Mateo bolted. The city blurred into gray smears as he sprinted, his sneakers slamming against the concrete. Regina's text echoed in his skull like a siren. "Your grandmother is in danger." The bus ride usually took 15 minutes. Mateo made it there in 7 on foot. By the time he hit the building, his heart was hammering against his ribs like it wanted to break out. He took the stairs 3 at a time, lungs burning, legs screaming. The front door was ajar. "Grandma!" he roared, bursting in. The silence that answered him was heavy, suffocating. The place was tossed. Sofa cushions on the floor, coffee table flipped, and those damn contract papers scattered everywhere. In the center of the mess lay a dark, wet pool. Mateo's stomach lurched. Please don't let that be blood. "Looking for the old woman?" A voice drifted from the kitchen. Mateo spun around. There was Regina Vargas, perched on a rickety kitchen chair, legs crossed with the same icy poise she wore in the executive suite. "What did you do?" His knuckles turned white. "Where is she?" "Relax, kid," she said smoothly. "She's fine. For the moment." "Where?" Regina smirked. It wasn't a smile, it was a predator baring its teeth. "Somewhere safe? Far from this dump. Think of it as an insurance policy. If you hurt her..." "If I do what, exactly?" Regina stood up, closing the distance with slow, clicking heels. "You're bright, Mateo. I'll give you that. But you're just a child. And children don't get how the real world operates. I get it just fine. You murdered my father, and now you're trying to shut me up." For a microsecond, her mask slipped. A flicker of surprise, gone as quickly as it came. "I see Daniela Herrera has been filling your head with stories. She was always a liability. She told me the truth. My father wrote the code that built Castellanos' fortune. I know his accident was a hit. And you have proof?" Regina tilted her head, amused. "The ramblings of a bitter ex-employee? Baseless conspiracy theories. No court on earth would even look at it. Then why snatch my grandmother? If you're so clean, why go to all this trouble to shut us down?" Regina paused. Her cold eyes bore into him, running the numbers, calculating the risk. "Take a seat, Mateo. It is time we spoke like grown-ups. I'm not sitting anywhere. I want my grandmother back, and you're going to give her to me. But first, you're going to listen. There are angles Daniela Herrera doesn't know about. Facts that might just flip your entire worldview." Every alarm bell in his head was warning him to run, but Mateo pulled up a chair anyway. He needed answers. If getting them meant playing nice with the enemy, so be it. Regina settled in across from him, folding her hands with a calm that felt entirely rehearsed. Your father had a brilliant mind, I'll give him that. But he was naive, painfully so. Don't you dare insult him. I'm not insulting him, Mateo. I'm just stating facts. Rodrigo showed up at Vertex Global clutching a game-changing algorithm, expecting a multi-million-dollar check. But he didn't grasp the mechanics of this industry. He didn't get that an idea is worthless without the funding to back it up. So Castellanos turned him down and stole the code instead? Castellanos walked away because your father's asking price was absurd. He had a prototype, not a scalable product. We put a different deal on the table. Come in-house, build the tech with our infrastructure, and take a cut of the profits. He said no because you vultures wanted full ownership. He said no because of his pride. He couldn't stomach the idea of needing help. Regina stood and drifted toward the window, gazing down at the slate-gray sprawl beneath them. What followed was tragic. Truly. That construction accident wasn't staged, Mateo. It wasn't sabotage. It was a contractor cutting corners with cheap materials to pad their margins. We were just the client. Then why pay my grandmother hush money? Because it was the decent thing to do. Legally, our hands were clean. But morally, we felt a debt. Your father had come to us in good faith. We failed to reach an agreement, sure, but when he died on our site, we wanted to ensure his family didn't starve. $50,000 isn't exactly a fortune. It was what our legal team deemed appropriate at the time. Looking back, I admit it was peanuts. Mateo eyed her, his guard still up. Her logic was sound. Suspiciously sound. And the code, if you didn't steal it, how did Vertex end up launching the exact system my father built? Regina pivoted to face him. Because Lorenzo hired a dedicated team to build something similar, not identical. Similar is the key word. Your father wasn't the only coding prodigy on the planet, Mateo. Parallel thinking happens. Different roads, same destination. Daniela Herrera tells a different story. Daniela Herrera has a personal vendetta against this company. She lost her sister in a car crash. Grief needs a target. She spun this elaborate web of conspiracy because facing the randomness of a tragedy is just too painful. Regina's words were taking root, cracking the foundation of his certainty. Could Daniela be wrong? Was her trauma making her see shadows where there were only coincidences? Then a memory flashed. The photo Daniela showed him, his father's diagrams. That handwriting was unmistakable. It mirrored his own. If you're so innocent, why snatch my grandmother? He demanded. Why not just talk to me? We didn't kidnap her, Mateo. We took her into protective custody. Protection from what? Regina let out a heavy sigh, acting as if the next words were a burden. Daniela Herrera isn't who she claims to be. Or rather, she's not only who she claims to be. For months, she's been channeling info to our competitors, rivals who would pay a king's ransom to watch us implode. You're trying to tell me she's a corporate spy. I'm saying she has her own scorecard, and you're just a pawn she's moving across the board. That puzzle you cracked yesterday, the one she admitted to writing, it wasn't just bait to catch Castellanos. It was a Trojan horse. A cold shiver traced Mateo's spine. What does that mean? When you fixed that code, you didn't just patch a leak. You installed a backdoor, a direct line into Vertex Global's most classified servers. She played you, Mateo. She used your skills to hack us. The ground seemed to shift beneath his feet. It wasn't impossible. He'd been so obsessed with the logic of the puzzle, he hadn't stopped to think about the architecture of the solution. He might have blindly created a fresh exploit while patching the old one. I don't buy it, he stammered, though the conviction was gone from his voice. Don't take my word for it. Check the logs yourself. You're smart enough to see the breadcrumbs, but until you do, your grandmother stays in our custody. For her own good, of course. And if I refuse to play ball? Regina's expression turned to stone. Then things get complicated. Complications neither of us can afford. The threat hung heavy in the air, distinct and cold. Mateo clenched his fists, that familiar feeling of powerlessness rising in his chest, suffocating him like rising tide water. What do you want from me? I want you to locate the back door Daniela built. I want you to weld it shut, and then I want you to sit down with our legal team and spill every single lie she fed you. You want me to rat her out. I want you to wake up. She played you, Mateo. She used your father's memory as a lever to manipulate you. Doesn't that warrant a little payback? Mateo stayed quiet, his brain spinning like a hard drive trying to process corrupt data. There was a glitch in Regina's narrative, something he couldn't point to in the code, but his gut was screaming that something was wrong. I want to see my grandmother, he said, his voice flat. I need proof she's safe. Done. We'll go now. Regina leaned in closer. But keep this in mind, Mateo. Loyalty isn't a donation, it's an exchange. We take care of our own, but cross us, we don't forgive. The location they were holding Doña Esperanza wasn't what Mateo expected. No damp warehouse, no dark basement. It was a 5-star hotel in the city center, complete with doorman and tails and crystal chandeliers that cost more than his life's earnings. Regina swiped a key card for the 15th floor, leading him to a suite guarded by 2 suits who looked like they chewed gravel for breakfast. Inside, he found his grandmother perched on a velvet sofa, holding a porcelain teacup and looking utterly bewildered. "Mijo!" Esperanza scrambled up, nearly dropping her tea, and rushed to wrap her grandson in a desperate hug. "Thank God you're okay. These men. They came to the apartment and said we had to leave right now. They said we were in danger." "Did they hurt you, Abuela?" No, they were polite enough, just silent. Dragged me here and told me to wait." Mateo shot a look at Regina that could have cut glass. The mess at the apartment? The puddle on the floor? Just spilled coffee from the rush, Regina said smoothly. Your grandmother was stubborn about leaving. We didn't want to panic her, but time was money. Suddenly, the side door opened. Carmen Lucero stepped out looking pale but steady. "Oh, thank the saints you're here." Carmen let out a shaky breath. "When I saw those men load Esperanza into the car, I thought it was a kidnapping. I tailed them here, but the guerrillas out front wouldn't let me up." "Carmen?" Esperanza blinked. "What are you doing here?" "I wasn't going to leave you alone, neighbor. Not after yesterday's drama." Mateo watched the scene, torn between relief and paranoia. His grandmother was untouched. Carmen was a rock. But Regina's words were still leaking into his mind like poison. Was Daniela a crusader, or had she been playing him since day one? Regina's phone buzzed, breaking the silence. She answered, listened for 2 seconds, and her polished mask cracked. "Understood. I'm en route." She hung up, turning to Mateo with ice in her eyes. "We have a situation. Someone is breaching the Vertex mainframe right now, using that exact back door." "I didn't do it. Obviously, you're standing right here." "Which means Daniela has a partner. She's running the heist while keeping you busy with sob stories about your dad." Mateo felt the floor drop out from under him. If Regina was right, Daniela's whole crusade was a smokescreen, a distraction while her real team raided the corporate servers. But if Regina was lying, this was just level 2 of the mind game, isolating him from the only person who told him the truth. Who do you trust? The corporate shark who kidnapped your family to a luxury suite? What about the woman who buried her sister and spent a lifetime chasing justice? "Get me to Vertex," Mateo insisted. "If there's a back door in that system, I'll sniff it out. Then we'll know exactly who's lying." Regina gave a sharp nod. "Your grandmother and friends stay here under protection." "You mean under guard?" "Semantics. As long as you play nice, they stay comfortable." Mateo pulled his grandmother into a fierce hug. "I'm going to fix this, Abuela. I promise." "Watch your back, son," she whispered, gripping his arm. "That woman, her eyes are cold, like a shark." I know. As Regina's town car sliced through the city toward the Vertex Tower, Mateo stared out at the passing lights, his mind racing. Someone was playing him, someone was lying. And the only way to find the puppet master was to get into the code and trace the strings. Approaching the steel and glass giant that loomed over the city, he wondered if he was walking toward answers or stepping into a cage he would never leave. In his pocket, his phone gave a single, short vibration. A text from an unknown number. "Don't trust Regina. There is no back door. She wants your access codes. Your father left a legacy behind, one she's desperate to keep buried." 47th floor, office 12. The answers are in the cold storage archives. Mateo swiped the notification away before Regina could catch a glimpse. This whole charade was getting messier by the minute, and he was stuck right in the crossfire. The high-speed elevator at Vertex Global rose without a sound, a stark contrast to the jackhammer pounding of Mateo's heart. He was terrified she could hear it. Every floor that flashed by was ticking down the seconds, either to the truth or a trap. Regina was glued to her screen, thumbs flying across the glass firing off crisis emails while the floor indicator counted their ascent. 35, 36, 37. "Once we land, you head straight for the server farm," she said, not even bothering to look up. "I need you to patch that backdoor breach before whoever is exploiting it does any real damage. Clear?" But Mateo had zero intention of stepping foot in that server room. Not yet. The message he'd just read was branded into his mind like a hot iron. 47th floor, office 12. Look in the old files. The elevator shuddered to a halt at floor 43, the nerve center for the mainframes. Regina stepped out first, projecting that effortless command that made everyone else shrink away. Techs and office drones parted like the Red Sea, terrified of being swept up in her wake. "This way," she barked, pointing down a corridor bathed in sterile blue light. "Actually, hold on," Mateo said, digging his heels in. "I need the restroom." Regina shot him a glare loaded with suspicion. "Can't it wait?" "No, it really can't. It's been hours. Just give me a second." Annoyance flashed across her perfectly made-up face, but she gave a sharp nod. "There's one at the end of the hall. You have 2 minutes." Mateo shuffled in the direction she pointed, feeling her gaze burning a hole between his shoulder blades until he rounded the corner. The second he was out of sight, he ditched the bathroom plan and sprinted for the emergency stairwell. 4 flights. He just had to leg it up 4 flights. His scuffed sneakers barely made a sound as he took the concrete steps 2 at a time. Blood roared in his ears, drowning out the echo of his own footsteps. When he reached the 47th floor, he eased the heavy door open. The hallway was a ghost town. Overhead lights flickered with an ominous buzz, like this wing of the building had been powered down and forgotten. The offices lining the corridor were shut tight. Some had signs collecting dust that read, "Out of service." Office 8, Office 9, Office 10, Office 11. Office 12. The door was cracked open just a hair, spilling a sliver of weak light into the hallway. Mateo nudged it open, holding his breath. The sight waiting for him inside froze him solid. It was a cramped office, clearly abandoned years ago. Cardboard boxes were stacked high against the walls alongside rusted filing cabinets, everything coated in a thick layer of grime. But right in the center, illuminated by a desk lamp someone had just switched on, sat an ancient computer terminal. Sitting in front of it, back to the door, was Professor Gabriel Navarro. "I knew you'd show up," he said, not even turning around. "You're just as predictable as your father was." Mateo felt the floor drop out from under him. "Professor Navarro, you sent the texts?" Navarro slowly swiveled his chair around. The warmth was gone. This wasn't the kindly academic Mateo knew from class. His eyes held something heavy, a mix of old grief and steel-hard resolve. "Take a seat, Mateo. There's a hell of a lot you need to learn and not enough time to teach it. Why should I trust a word you say? Because your dad and I were best friends." The confession hit Mateo like a punch to the gut. He collapsed into a dusty chair, his brain struggling to catch up. "You knew my father?" "Knew him? Kid, Rodrigo and I were inseparable. We practically lived in the public library, teaching ourselves to code from dog-eared manuals on borrowed computers. Just 2 broke kids with dreams way too big for the zip code we were born into." Navarro stood up and walked over to a filing cabinet, unlocking it with a key he pulled from under his shirt. "The only difference is I got lucky. I got the scholarship. I got the degree and the tenure. Your dad never got that break, but it didn't stop him. He kept learning, kept building, kept dreaming." He pulled out a thick, yellowed folder. "This is what your father left behind. The legacy Regina Vargas and Lorenzo Castellanos have spent years trying to erase." Mateo took the folder, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Inside were schematics, technical papers, and something that made his heart skip a beat. Photographs. Pictures of his dad. Not the blurry, sad snapshots his grandmother kept in a shoebox. These were different. In these, Rodrigo Ríos was standing in front of mainframes, scribbling on whiteboards covered in math, laughing with a young Gabriel Navarro. He looked alive. He looked hopeful. "Your father was a genius, Mateo, and I don't use that word lightly." Navarro sat back down, leaning in close. "The algorithm he wrote wasn't just a breakthrough. It was light years ahead of anything else on the planet. When he pitched the idea to the suits at Vertex, Castellanos was floored, but terrified too. Terrified of what, you ask? Losing his grip on the market? Your dad's code was a game changer. It was going to make elite cybersecurity accessible to the little guys. Mom-and-pop shops, freelancers, regular people. Everyone would have had the same armor as the Fortune 500, and that terrified Vertex. Their whole empire was built on gatekeeping safety and charging a fortune for the key. So they killed the project, on paper at least. Behind closed doors, Castellanos put a different deal on the table. He didn't just want the code, he wanted to own the coder. He wanted to own your father. The contract was a shackle. Total ownership of everything Rodrigo ever created or would create. Just for a steady paycheck, your dad said no. Obviously. Rodrigo wasn't looking for a boss. He wanted his genius to help the public, not line the pockets of the 1%. That integrity cost him his life. Mateo felt the sting of tears but forced them back. He had to know. Go on, what happened next? Navarro let out a ragged breath, the confession physically hurting him. 3 weeks after saying no, your dad was gone, crushed in that construction site accident. I couldn't sit still, so I started digging. That scaffolding? It passed inspection with flying colors 24 hours prior. Structurally sound. It didn't just break, Mateo. It was rigged. I never found the smoking gun, but the timing says it all. 2 months after the funeral, Vertex rolls out a new security protocol. It was Rodrigo's work. Not inspired by it, not based on it, it was a carbon copy. Why stay quiet? Mateo's voice trembled. You let this slide for years. Why? Navarro's face crumbled. The stoic professor vanished. All Mateo saw now was a man eaten alive by his own conscience. Because I was weak. I was terrified they'd come for me next. I told myself Rodrigo was gone and nothing would bring him back, so I kept my head down. Tears streamed down the old man's face. I gave up, but then you walked in. You stepped into that boardroom and it was like seeing a ghost. You have his eyes, Mateo. His grit. That same fire in your belly. I realized fate was handing me a shot at redemption, a chance to finally fix this mess. That's why I tipped the scales during your evaluation. Why I pulled strings. I'm the one who reached out to Daniela Herrera months ago. I fed her the data to build the bait code that hooked you. I sent the anonymous tips that led you to this very room. The fog cleared. Every confusing detail, every coincidence, it all clicked into place for Mateo. Daniela isn't a corporate spy, is she? She's the real deal. This company destroyed her sister, and she spent every waking moment since trying to burn them down. Regina played you. She lied about Daniela, just like she lies about the weather. There is no back door. It's a honeypot. She wanted you to breach the system so she could pin a felony hacking charge on you. They'd frame you for the initial breach. Claim Daniela was your handler. They'd ruin your name before you could utter a word of defense. The sheer scale of the setup hit Mateo like a freight train. He'd almost walked right into the slaughterhouse. He pointed a shaking finger at the desk. So, what's in the file? What is Regina so desperate to bury? Navarro flipped the folder open, landing on a marked page. It was a legal document, dated just weeks before the accident. At the bottom, 2 signatures stared back at him. Rodrigo Ríos and Lorenzo Castellanos. I'm lost, Mateo stammered. You said he told them to shove it. He rejected the buyout, Navarro corrected, but Castellanos came back with a partnership, a collaboration. Your dad keeps the IP rights, but Vertex funds the development. Best of both worlds. Your dad thought it was a square deal, so he signed, but there's a dead man's switch buried in the fine print. Clause 17 in the event of the creator's death, full ownership transfers immediately to Vertex Global. The room spun. Castellanos didn't just capitalize on a tragedy, he planned it. He got Rodrigo to sign his life away, literally. Once the ink was dry, your father was worth more dead than alive. He signed his own death warrant. The dam finally broke, and Mateo wept. It wasn't just grief. It was pure, unadulterated rage. The feeling of being small against a giant, a black hole of pain. It wasn't bad luck, it wasn't an accident. He was executed for being too smart and too proud to bow down to the corporate overlords. Why now? Mateo choked out. Why tell me this now? What am I supposed to do with this? Navarro knelt, gripping Mateo's shoulders with a paternal desperation. Finish the job, Mateo. Burn them to the ground with the truth. And know that I've got your back this time. Navarro reached into his jacket and pulled out a flash drive. The weapon you need is right here. Original contracts, safety reports, and the internal emails where they laugh about the cover-up. It's all here. There's something else. Go on. Footage from the pitch meeting. Your dad was smart. He wore a wire when he showed Castellanos the code. They had no idea the camera was rolling. In the clip, Castellanos admits the algorithm is genius. Then he says he'll do whatever it takes to steal it. His exact words. Whatever it takes. That was the smoking gun. Suddenly the office doors burst open. Regina Vargas stood there, framed by 2 corporate security goons. She looked ready to kill. I knew you were a liability, Navarro. Years of playing the faithful lapdog, and now you decide to bite? Navarro stood up, shielding the boy with his own body. It's finished, Regina. The kid knows everything. By tomorrow, so will everyone else. The truth? Regina laughed, cold and sharp. People like us decide what's true. That's how the world works, Professor. Not anymore. She signaled the muscle, grabbed them, stripped them of everything. The guards moved in, but before they could reach them, the overhead sputtered and died. The 47th floor plunged into pitch black. In the void, a hand gripped Mateo's arm. Navarro's voice was a harsh whisper. Run. Fire escape. Now. Daniela's downstairs with your abuela. I'll buy you time. I can't just leave you. You have to. You're the only one who can clear your father's name. Go, Mateo. Don't look back. Mateo took off. He sprinted blindly, clutching the drive to his chest like it was his father's beating heart. It was the only piece of him left. Shouts and the thud of bodies hitting the floor echoed behind him. He didn't stop. He flew down the stairwell, guided only by the rail in sheer panic. 46th floor, 45th, 44th. Every step was a fight for survival. He burst into the lobby, panting. The space washed in the eerie red glow of emergency strobes. Waiting by the exit were Daniela, Carmen, and his grandmother. Mijo! Esperanza rushed him, her embrace nearly knocking the wind out of him. Thank God, you're safe. We need to move now, Daniela urged. They scrambled toward an idling sedan. What happened to the power? Mateo gasped. Killed the grid. Daniela smirked, unlocking the doors. I've got a few moves of my own. Tires screeched as they peeled away. Behind them, the Vertex Global Tower loomed like a jagged monolith against the stars, watching them leave. Mateo stared out the back window. He thought of Navarro. The man had given up everything for this. Is the professor going to make it? Daniela gripped the wheel tighter. Gabriel knew the cost when he signed up for this fight. Tonight was his penance. He was tired of staying quiet while they crushed people. Mateo slumped. I don't want anyone else getting hurt for me. His grandmother grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. Listen to me. None of this is on you. You, Daniela, the professor, you're doing the right thing. It's what your father would have wanted. She's right, kid, Carmen added from the front. Some fights need to be fought no matter how much they bleed you. Mateo squeezed the plastic drive in his palm. It felt small, but it held everything. The truth about his dad. The truth about Vertex Global. Enough evidence to topple an empire built on the backs of people they thought didn't matter. Where are we headed? Daniela caught his eye in the rearview mirror. Somewhere they can't touch us. Tomorrow, we show the world who Lorenzo Castellanos really is. The car faded into the city night, carrying the justice they had waited years to claim. Meanwhile, high up in the Vertex Global Tower, Lorenzo Castellanos answered his phone. It was the call that would crack his foundation. Sir, we have a situation. The kid got away. He has the files. The silence on the line was heavy, more terrifying than any scream. Castellanos didn't scream when he was angry. He just executed. Dawn broke over the skyline as they pulled up to a familiar landmark, the National Broadcasting Headquarters. Daniela had made a call during the drive. She reached out to the one journalist in the city who couldn't be bought. Sofia Montalvo was already waiting at the curb. She had eyes that missed nothing, and a reputation for dragging rich men's secrets into the light. Do you have it? She asked, cutting straight to the chase. Mateo handed over the drive. Everything's there. Contracts, emails, the safety logs, and a video of Castellanos admitting he'd kill to get my father's code. Sofia held the device like a weapon. This changes the game. 2 hours later, Mateo sat under the studio lights. Just out of frame, his grandmother held his hand, grounding him. Carmen and Daniela stood in the shadows of the studio, watching with a mix of hope and sheer terror. The on-air light turned red. Sofia Montalvo stared down the barrel of the camera lens. Good morning. We are about to break a story that will shake the foundations of the corporate elite. It is a tale of stolen genius, lives grinded into dust for profit, and a kid from the streets who had the guts to demand the truth. Meet Mateo Ríos. When he took the mic, he laid it all out. His father, the revolutionary code, and the contract with the fine print that killed him. He exposed the car crash for what it really was. A hit, not an accident. He tore down years of silence and spin, revealing a family destroyed by the greed of a man who had everything but still needed more. His voice cracked just once, right as he held up a faded photo. This was Rodrigo Ríos, my father. A man who wanted to change the world. His only mistake was trusting the sharks in suits to have a conscience. I don't have a fancy degree. I don't have a legacy last name. I just have the truth. And today, you are going to hear it. Then the footage rolled. The secret recording of the meeting between his father and Castellanos beamed across millions of screens. The CEO's voice cut through the audio, crisp and damning. "This algorithm is worth more than anything we have ever built. I will do whatever it takes to own it. Whatever it takes." The words landed like a guilty verdict. The market reaction was instant and brutal. Within hours, Vertex Global stock was in free fall. Protesters were already swarming the steps of the corporate headquarters. Detective Ramiro Estrada, who had spent years chasing dead ends on the Ríos case, finally had the smoking gun he needed. Lorenzo Castellanos was in handcuffs by sundown. News choppers circled as police escorted him out of the glass tower he had built on lies. The arrogance was gone from his face, replaced by the hollow look of a man watching his empire burn. Regina Vargas tried to catch a flight, but authorities grabbed her at the gate. Feds seized her laptop and found gigabytes of dirty laundry, including detailed playbooks on how to scrub the evidence after Rodrigo's death. Deep inside the Vertex facility, they found Professor Gabriel Navarro, battered and bruised but breathing. He had bought Mateo just enough time to get the data out. As the medics loaded him up, he grabbed a paramedic's arm. Did the boy make it? Did he get out? When he got the nod, Navarro smiled and closed his eyes. The weight of his silence finally lifted. A few weeks later, the city felt different. The air was lighter, and it wasn't just because of the arrests. Mateo's fight had struck a nerve across the globe. It was the ultimate underdog story. A poor kid taking down a titan to honor a father he barely knew. His inbox was flooded. Thousands of messages from kids with big dreams and empty pockets. Parents wrote in, seeing their own struggles in his story. People who had given up on the system started to believe again. True to his father's vision, the algorithm wasn't sold. It was released to the public domain. Now it belonged to everyone. Anyone could use it, improve it, share it. A man died too young, but his dream was finally alive. On a sunny afternoon, weeks after the dust settled, Mateo walked through the city cemetery. His grandmother walked beside him, clutching a bundle of wildflowers she had picked herself. They stopped at a modest plot. The stone was simple. Rodrigo Ríos, father, dreamer, genius. Mateo knelt in the grass and arranged the flowers. "Hey, Dad, I know I was just a baby when you left, so you don't remember me. But I remember you. I see you in every line of code I write, in every puzzle I solve. I see you every time Abuela looks at me." Tears tracked through the dust on his cheeks, but his voice held steady. "I found the truth. I told the whole world who you really were. And now your work is out there helping people, just like you wanted. They couldn't silence you, Dad. They just hit the pause button." Esperanza knelt next to her grandson, her own tears mixing with his. "Your father would be so proud of you, mijo." "I know I am. I couldn't have done it without you, Abuela. You taught me to never back down. You gave me everything." She shook her head gently. "No, child. That fire was always inside you. I just helped you light the match." They held each other tight. Two survivors of a storm that had raged for years and finally blown itself out. Months later, Mateo stood on a very different kind of platform. The National University Auditorium was packed to the rafters. He was the keynote speaker for a new initiative, a scholarship program designed for brilliant minds that the system usually ignores. Down in the front row sat the people who made it possible. His grandmother, wiping away fresh tears of Carmen Lucero, stood tall, pride gleaming in her eyes. She used to scrub floors in this building, and now she was running the entire scholarship program. Then there was Daniela Herrera. Her sister finally got justice, right alongside Rodrigo, and Professor Gabriel. Navarro, looking like a new man back in charge of the university's tech wing after his recovery. Mateo grabbed the mic. "They told me to quit. Said kids from the barrio don't solve problems the experts can't crack. They said if you don't have a fancy piece of paper on your wall, you're nobody." He let the silence hang, scanning the sea of hopeful young faces. They were dead wrong. A ripple of applause started low and swelled into a roar. "My dad was brilliant, but the world never gave him a shot. My abuela is the wisest person I know, and she never made it past grade school. Genius doesn't check your bank account or your last name. It just needs an open door." He pointed at the crowd. "You guys are that door. Every single one of you brings something to the table that no one else can. Don't let the suits tell you you're small. Don't let the system convince you that your ambitions are out of reach. Because if your dreams don't scare you, they aren't big enough." Speech over, Mateo hopped off the stage. He bypassed the VIPs and went straight to his grandmother, squeezing her tight enough to break a rib, just like she'd always done for him. "We made it, Abuela. We finally made it." "No, mijo." Esperanza smiled, tears streaming down her face. "You did this, and your father, wherever he is right now, he's beaming." That night, back in the cramped apartment they refused to trade for a mansion, Mateo sat at his ancient rig, the same junk heap rescued from the trash that started it all. Before shutting it down one last time to ship it to the tech museum, he typed a final command. "For Dad, your code is still running. Your dream is alive. Your son is alive, and the world finally listened." Outside, the city slept under a blanket of stars. Somewhere out there, another broke kid with a wild imagination was just discovering what he could do. Somewhere, another grandmother was working her fingers to the bone to keep the lights on. Somewhere, the next legend was being born. Because this wasn't just Mateo Ríos' victory. It belonged to everyone who had ever been counted out. Everyone who refused to shut up and sit down. Everyone who realized that real power isn't about money or titles, it's about the truth. And the truth, just like Mateo proved, it always claws its way into the light.